When civilizations reach their breaking point, they all turn to the same dangerous weapon. It makes no difference whether they're legendary empires or contemporary world powers. It makes no difference if their rulers are monarchs, elected officials, or autocrats. When pressure mounts, when obligations multiply, when conflicts need financing, they all commit the same destructive error. They activate the currency machines. And without exception, the outcome is disastrous. Tonight, we're exploring 3 pivotal moments when entire societies believed they could bypass economic reality by conjuring money from nothing. What you're witnessing isn't merely historical record. It's a formula for collapse that continues cycling through time. And the danger signals are burning brighter than they've ever been. The sequence never varies. It begins with upheaval, national turmoil, financial breakdown, military conflicts, revolutionary pressures. The state requires capital, but the coffers are bare. Increasing taxation sparks uprising. Credit has boundaries. Then they uncover what appears miraculous. Generate additional currency. Manufacture prosperity from emptiness. Challenge resolved. Correct? Absolutely not. Because what unfolds next follows an identical devastating sequence. Costs skyrocket. Accumulated wealth vanishes. Communities tear apart. And dominions that once commanded continents disintegrate into nothing. The currency they assumed would rescue them transforms into the toxin that destroys them. Here's what makes this chilling. Every authority who chooses this route believes they're exceptional. They assume their circumstances are special. Their financial experts are more capable. Their framework is more resilient. They observe other societies crumble and convince themselves it's impossible here, until reality strikes. We're going to study 3 civilizations that discovered this truth through devastation. Imperial Rome, where Caesars learned they could reduce silver in coins to finance perpetual warfare. Weimar Germany, where a cornered administration produced marks by the billions to satisfy crushing obligations. And contemporary Zimbabwe, where authorities transformed a thriving country into an economic nightmare in under 10 years. Each narrative follows an identical trajectory. Each dominion believed it had unlocked the formula for boundless prosperity, and each paid the ultimate cost when truth came crashing through. But this transcends ancient events. The identical mechanisms operate right now, and the risks have reached unprecedented levels, because when the coming breakdown arrives, it won't remain within a single dominion or territory. It will cascade across the entire planet. Let's begin with the grandfather of all currency catastrophes. Rome didn't collapse because of foreign invasions or governmental decay. Those were merely symptoms. The genuine assassin was concealed in full view in every coin that circulated throughout the realm. For generations, Rome's financial foundation was the denarius, a silver coin so reliable that traders from Britannia to Egyptus accepted it without hesitation. Almost entirely silver, struck with accuracy, guaranteed by the complete authority of Earth's mightiest empire. Roman legionaries received their compensation in denarii. Traders preserved their fortunes in them. Citizens accumulated for old age by gathering chests overflowing with brilliant silver. But maintaining an empire demands resources, staggering quantities of resources. Legions positioned on remote boundaries required consistent payment. Infrastructure, water systems, and public spaces needed perpetual upkeep, and Rome was perpetually engaged in conflict somewhere. Germania, Parthia, Britannia, uprisings in Gaul. Every military operation exhausted the treasury. By the 2nd century, the calculations were becoming unsustainable. Tax income couldn't match military expenditures. Citizens were already maximally burdened, and demanding more risked rebellion. Borrowing had constraints in an era without central banking or debt instruments, so the Caesars uncovered what they considered brilliant. Rather than acknowledging insolvency, they discreetly decreased the silver proportion in each denarius. Not sufficient for immediate public detection, but adequate to extend their precious metal stockpiles. They could strike additional coins utilizing identical silver quantities. Additional coins signified increased buying capacity for the state. Crisis resolved. The statistics reveal this gradual catastrophe. Under Augustus, who governed at the empire's dawn, the denarius held 95% pure silver. Citizens could test the coin with their teeth and verify the metal. They could sense its mass in their palms. It represented genuine value you could grasp. but each following Caesar trimmed slightly more. By the early 3rd century under Emperor Caracalla, silver proportion had plummeted to 50%. The coin appeared identical, still displayed the imperial emblem, still bore the authority of Roman power, but half its worth had evaporated into nothing. The deterioration accelerated. By Gallienus's reign in the mid-3rd century, the denarius held under 5% silver. What had once been solid silver coinage was now bronze with superficial silver coating. Citizens could scrape the exterior and observe the silver peel away, exposing the inferior metal beneath. People aren't foolish. They could perceive what was occurring. The coins felt less substantial. They appeared altered. Traders began measuring them, examining them, refusing the obviously compromised ones. Price increases followed inevitably. Costs rose because the currency itself was becoming valueless. A portion of grain that previously cost 1 denarius suddenly demanded 2, then 5, then 10. Not because grain was unavailable, but because the coins were empty shells. This wasn't theoretical economics. It was households observing their accumulated savings evaporate. Soldiers realizing their compensation couldn't purchase sustenance. Traders rejecting Roman currency completely. The more trust deteriorated, the more frantically Caesars compromised the currency. They required quantity to substitute for quality. If each coin held less worth, they'd produce more coins. If people questioned the silver proportion, they'd saturate the market with bronze masquerading as valuable metal. This generated the destructive spiral that has recurred in every hyperinflation afterward. Devalued currency required additional currency to purchase identical goods. Additional currency production made each unit less valuable. Citizens abandoned faith in the currency and insisted on payment in commodities, gold, or foreign coins. The administration responded by producing exponentially more, hastening the breakdown. Regional economies regressed to direct exchange. Agricultural workers exchanged grain immediately for implements. Artisans swapped pottery for garments. The advanced monetary framework that had unified the empire was fragmenting into basic transactions. Roman civilization was literally disintegrating, one compromised coin at a time. But the genuine disaster was still approaching. Because when your currency becomes valueless, everything else begins unraveling too. Soldiers couldn't receive payment, so they revolted or defected. Revenue collectors discovered their collections worthless before delivering them to Rome. Regional administrators realized they governed territories contributing nothing to imperial finances. The crisis culminated during what scholars term the 3rd century crisis. Between 235 and 284 AD, the empire suffered 50 years of turmoil. Nearly 50 Caesars emerged and disappeared, most murdered within months of assuming control. Diseases ravaged the provinces. Foreign tribes challenged the frontiers. Internal conflicts erupted as generals battled for dominance. Behind all the political chaos was simple reality. The currency was shattered, so everything else shattered too. You can't operate an empire on valueless coins any more than you can construct a structure on shifting sand. The base had decomposed, and the superstructure was collapsing. Emperor Diocletian attempted to halt the hemorrhaging with cost restrictions. In 301 AD, he issued the edict establishing maximum prices, establishing costs for over 1,000 commodities and services. Violators faced execution. The edict was catastrophic. You can't mandate that valueless currency has worth any more than you can command the sun to cease rising. Underground commerce exploded. Legitimate exchange collapsed. People discovered that legislation couldn't repair broken currency. Ultimately, Rome rejected the denarius entirely and introduced the gold solidus under Constantine. But by that point, the destruction was permanent. The Western Empire was hollow, sustained exclusively by inertia and the recollection of former magnificence. This is the first teaching history provides about currency production. It invariably begins with upheaval that appears to warrant exceptional actions. It invariably starts with authorities who believe they can regulate the mechanism, dictate the result, and escape the destiny of their forerunners. And it invariably concludes identically. The Roman breakdown should have been a cautionary tale echoing through centuries. Instead, it became a formula that every desperate administration would ultimately replicate. Advance 16 centuries to a vanquished Germany in 1918, and observe the sequence repeat with frightening accuracy. The Treaty of Versailles didn't merely conclude World War I. It condemned Germany to financial execution. The victorious nations demanded compensation so enormous they exceeded understanding. 132 billion gold marks, approximating roughly $400 billion presently. To contextualize that, It exceeded Germany's complete gross domestic production. The victors demanded Germany finance the entire conflict plus interest for the following 60 years. The German administration confronted an impossible selection. They could decline payment and confront military invasion by French and British armies. They could impose taxation to thresholds that would spark revolution. They could borrow capital they possessed no possibility of repaying. Or they could do what administrations invariably do when cornered. They could print their escape from difficulty. Initially, it appeared rational. The Reichsbank commenced issuing new marks to satisfy reparation payments. Just provisional actions, they reassured the population, just sufficient to navigate through the crisis. The printing mechanism started gradually, carefully. A few billion marks here, a few billion there. Nothing unmanageable. But obligation possesses its own momentum. Once you commence printing currency to satisfy commitments, you can never print adequately. Each payment demanded additional marks. Each new batch of currency diminished the existing currency's value. And as the mark weakened, Germany required exponentially more to acquire the gold and foreign currency demanded by the Allies. By 1922, the printing mechanisms operated continuously day and night. The Reichsbank employed complete shifts of laborers exclusively to operate the machines generating new currency. Printing enterprises throughout Germany were engaged to assist with the burden. The administration was literally manufacturing currency faster than they could quantify it. The figures became absurd. In January 1922, one American dollar purchased 300 German marks. By July, it purchased 800. By December, it purchased 7,000. The mark wasn't merely declining. It was in free fall, accelerating toward extinction. Laborers began insisting on payment twice daily because their morning compensation was valueless by evening. Dining establishments modified their menus hourly as food expenses soared. Store proprietors abandoned printing new cost labels and simply inscribed figures on chalkboards, erasing and revising them throughout the day. But the genuine madness was still approaching. In 1923, hyperinflation achieved levels that sound fictional. Costs didn't merely increase, they exploded exponentially. A loaf of bread that cost 1 mark in 1919 cost 12 marks in 1921. By mid-1923, that identical loaf cost over 3,000 marks. By September, it cost 2 million marks. By November, it cost over 200 billion marks. Citizens required wheelbarrows to transport sufficient cash for basic acquisitions. Children entertained themselves with stacks of valueless bills because they were more plentiful than playthings. People decorated their residences with currency because it was less expensive than purchasing actual wallpaper. The German mark had transformed into a bitter mockery, an emblem of national disgrace printed on progressively valueless paper. The human toll was catastrophic. Life savings gathered over decades disappeared instantaneously. Retirees who had labored their complete lives discovered themselves impoverished. The middle class, the foundation of German society, was eliminated entirely. Their banking accounts, insurance contracts, and government securities became meaningless figures on valueless paper. Meanwhile, those who comprehended what was occurring protected themselves. The affluent converted marks into foreign currency, gold, or property. Industrial proprietors settled their obligations with valueless paper and emerged from hyperinflation debt-free and asset-rich. International speculators acquired German enterprises for the cost of a meal. This generated a brutal wealth transfer from savers to debtors, from the middle class to the elite, from ordinary Germans to foreign investors. Hyperinflation didn't merely destroy currency. It destroyed the social structure holding the nation together. Trust evaporated. Traditional principles crumbled. The assurance that diligent effort and saving would be compensated became a deception everyone could witness. Political extremism occupied the void created by economic breakdown. When people forfeit everything they've labored for, when their administration destroys their savings through monetary manipulation, they become desperate for someone to blame. They become receptive to radical solutions from radical authorities. The Nazi Party's membership expanded dramatically during the hyperinflation crisis. Adolf Hitler's attempted seizure in Munich occurred in November 1923 at the precise peak of the monetary collapse. It failed, but the foundation was established. When people's currency becomes valueless, they start seeking scapegoats and authoritarian figures. Democracy transforms into a luxury they can no longer afford. Germany ultimately stabilized by introducing a new currency supported by land and gold. The hyperinflation concluded as abruptly as it had commenced, but the destruction was permanent. An entire generation had discovered that administrations deceive about currency, that savings are fragile, that democracy provides no shield against financial destruction. This teaching would reverberate through German politics for decades. It would shape their response to the subsequent crisis in the 1930s. It would mold their approach to monetary strategy after World War II. The trauma of observing currency become meaningless doesn't disappear quickly. It becomes embedded in the national consciousness, a wound that never completely heals. Yet somehow the world didn't absorb Germany's suffering. The identical error would be replicated repeatedly in different nations, different decades, different circumstances. Because when crisis arrives, when administrations confront impossible selections, the temptation to print currency becomes overwhelming. The third act of our monetary catastrophe occurs not in ancient Rome or war-devastated Europe, but in modern Africa. Zimbabwe in the year 2000 was an operational nation with a stable currency, productive agriculture, and an expanding economy. 20 years later, it had become equivalent with hyperinflation so extreme that children utilized trillion-dollar notes as entertainment money. This wasn't ancient record or wartime desperation. This was the 21st century with all our supposed comprehension of economics and monetary strategy. Yet Zimbabwe succeeded in destroying its currency so completely that the administration ultimately rejected it altogether, adopting foreign currencies just to operate. The breakdown commenced with land redistribution strategies that decimated agricultural output. Zimbabwe had been the grain supplier of southern Africa, exporting sustenance across the continent. But political decisions destroyed the agricultural sector almost instantly. Food output plummeted. Export income vanished. The administration discovered itself confronting budget deficiencies that expanded larger every month. Sound recognizable? Crisis, empty treasury, desperate administration. The identical arrangement that had destroyed Rome and Germany was manifesting again. And once again, authorities convinced themselves they were different, that their circumstances were exceptional, that printing currency would resolve their challenges rather than generate new ones. President Robert Mugabe's administration commenced printing Zimbabwe dollars to address budget shortfalls. Initially, the quantity appeared controllable. A few billion here, a few billion there. Just adequate to maintain government services operating, to compensate civil servants, to sustain the appearance of a functioning state. But printing currency to address deficits is like consuming seawater to cure dehydration. It provides momentary relief while worsening the fundamental challenge. Each new batch of currency diluted existing currency's value. As costs rose, the administration required exponentially more currency to acquire identical goods and services. The printing mechanisms accelerated. By 2003, inflation had achieved triple digits. By 2006, it surpassed 1,000% annually. By 2008, Zimbabwe was experiencing hyperinflation so extreme that economists struggled to quantify it accurately. The official inflation rate peaked at an incomprehensible 89 sextillion%. That's a figure with 21 zeros following it. The sequence never changes, exclusively the names and the dates. Rome's Caesars assumed they could extend silver indefinitely. German politicians believed they could print their escape from Versailles. Zimbabwe's authorities convinced themselves they were constructing a new economy. Every time the narrative concludes identically. The currency dies, the population suffers, and empires crumble into nothing. What makes this terrifying presently is the magnitude. Rome's breakdown was regional. Germany's hyperinflation was national. Zimbabwe's disaster was local. But now we inhabit a world where every significant economy operates on paper currencies supported by nothing but assurances. Central banks synchronize their currency production. Obligations are quantified in trillions, not millions. When the coming monetary breakdown arrives, it won't remain confined to one empire or one continent. It will be planetary. The danger signals are illuminating everywhere. Administrations producing trillions during every crisis. Obligation levels that would have horrified previous generations. Inflation returning after decades of stability. The identical desperation, the identical rationalizations, the identical conviction that this time is different. History doesn't duplicate, but if you disregard its teachings, it will devastate you all the same. The empires we've studied tonight all committed the identical fatal error. They confused paper with prosperity, assurances with worth, printing with abundance. And every one of them paid the ultimate cost. The question isn't whether the coming monetary breakdown will occur. The question is whether you'll be prepared when it does. If this revealed the patterns that define our world, hit subscribe. History contains all the solutions.